When I started high school, I feel I had some pretty close encounters due to my naivety. I'm a female and had very poor self-esteem, so while I did have some close friends, I was also quiet and reserved. However, as I was going into a new school, I wanted to put myself out there more. I wanted crazy memories with my friends. I wanted to try new things and maybe get my first boyfriend. So in order to do this, I wanted to change myself so I could be happy with who I was. My birthday was over the summer, so I saved up as much money as I could and finally convinced my parents to let me dye my hair a deep purple and black, and even started doing some of those makeup tutorials. I know it may sound stupid to some, but I know there were a lot of girls that felt the same way as me at the time. Again, I know it sounds stupid now, but it really made a difference to me. I walked into that school for the first time feeling like a different person, except I was still the quiet, smart girl in the back. The first few months were not unusual. My friends and I hung out between classes. All four of us were able to dye our hair, so we had a bit of an ego boost, and we did have some people notice too. There was one girl in particular, Shelby, that was on the choir team that complimented my hair, which made me feel great because she was one of the more charismatic girls. She wasn't the mean and popular type because she was genuinely friendly with anyone, and she had a lot of friends, but she just never really talked to me except for in passing. That's where things started changing for me. While my friends and I were leaving PE, we were singing some stupid song when Shelby complimented me on my voice. She was in the same class, so she could hear us. She said I should try for choir next year, which I never would have thought about being the person I was. From there, she began talking to me more. I would help her on assignments in class, and she even brought in her makeup once to do mine before first period. We started hanging out outside of school and became pretty close friends. Me hanging out with Shelby also meant I was around more guys than just my brother and his friends. The ones she hung around started paying attention to me, and I didn't dislike it. It was different and something I wanted out of high school. One night, Shelby was staying over at my house and helping me dye my hair again. While we were waiting, we started messing around on my laptop. She showed me her Facebook page and a few other sites that she would go on, and showed me another website that I had never heard of before. To explain it the best I can, it was supposed to be like a blog targeted towards teenagers as a safe place to talk about your concerns, fears, things like that. You could vent there or just share your creativity. It was all text-based, so you couldn't send or receive pictures. Shelby posted a lot of lyrics to her favorite songs or poems she wrote. She said there was a private message option, which was like an email, but still no media could be sent or received. She said she used this a lot since her parents monitored her email too. So I followed and set up an account as well. She helped me set up her personalized wallpaper and bio, and pretty quickly I had a lot of supporters, which were like friends or followers. I started using this daily. I would post music lyrics, poems, or songs I wrote, little tidbits about my day, and so forth. I even tried helping others that were not in a good state of mind when I could. It almost became like a job for me. That was the problem, though. I do admit I had been told by teachers on a few occasions to put my phone away, and once had it taken away by a teacher. It was my English teacher. He was weird in the sense that he was always cheerful to talk to, especially when we first got into class. If you needed help with something or needed more time on a project, as long as it wasn't abused, he was willing to help. But if you interrupted him in even the slightest during lecture, he seemed to come unglued. He would slam his hand on a desk, do that ear-piercing whistle thing, and I unfortunately got caught on my phone and he took it from me. I had to get it back from him at the end of the day. I was more careful with having it out, especially in his class. Going back to this site, other than what it was intended for, some people used it to set up fights. It unfortunately was not blocked on the school's network, so when one larger fight took place, they were able to check the history under their logins and see this site. Because of this, the site was blocked from the school network, and the teachers were not very well aware of this too, and started monitoring harder for phones that were out. I was not a fighter, so I never used it for that. But I did on occasion have a few guys on there that I talked to and flirted with. There was even a new section added where you can give people virtual gifts for points, which you earn for doing certain tasks, such as logging in, making a post, things like that. The gifts can then be sent with a name, or you can send it anonymously. I got a few from people I knew, but then I started getting ones weekly that were anonymous. I thought it was cool and showed my friends to gauge if they were doing it. They claimed they didn't and were just as excited and curious as myself to know who it was. I figured if not them, maybe it was a mutual friend, or maybe I really did just have an admirer. So I made a post about it, saying something about how I appreciated them. The next day, I got a response from a username I wasn't familiar with, saying it was them and that they were happy I liked them. My friends didn't recognize the name either, so me being me, deduced it as someone who did actually like me. From then on, they would reply to all my posts with a compliment on it, then would call me beautiful, gorgeous, etc. I really didn't mind it for a while. I started getting private messages from the same person saying I was perfect for them. I tried asking who they were, but all they would tell me was that they went to the same school, but were too scared to approach me. I tried to convince them to, but they always refused, but the messages didn't stop. Hello, beautiful. Good morning, princess. I hope my goddess has a great day. I remember the messages like that because they creeped me out to this day, and I have troubles with hearing it now. This went on for a while, but it started getting old. That's all they ever did, so I started ignoring it. I don't think they liked that though, because they began to beg me to acknowledge them, and they finally got that when the messages became more explicit and vulgar, started talking about my body and what they would do to me. I still didn't have a boyfriend, so I didn't even know how to react to that. So I just decided to block that person. After about a week or so, I started getting the same type of messages from a new name, so I immediately blocked it too. Thinking they may have gotten the hint, I moved on as normal. Towards the end of the semester, PE then had swim classes, and since it was my last period for the day, sometimes I would just walk home in my swimsuit and cover up. By the time I had gotten home and showered, I had messages from a new person that specifically mentioned my swimsuit and something along the lines of how it was hard to resist not snatching me up from the name of my street. Now, this made me panic a bit, because now I am really being followed and they know where I live. I just sent them a message saying to leave me alone and blocked them again. They didn't stop. I can't tell you how many more this person made and how many more messages I would get where they just got worse and worse. They would describe what I was wearing or where I was when they saw me, what they wanted to do to me, and even kept saying they were going to take me away and kept putting the date and counting down the days. April 17th. I hate that day now. There's always something there that makes me think I need to watch my back on that day. This all started to crash down when we were in study hour, and Shelby asked me about going to her birthday party, and it was going to be the weekend of April 17th. I lost it. I felt horrible, but Part of me thought it was her screwing with me this whole time, and I started yelling and crying. The teacher walked me to the counselor's room where I told her everything that was happening. My parents were called in and they called the cops to have it all reported. They weren't upset that I hadn't told them about it, but were more so concerned about finding out who did this to me. Since they thought it was a fellow student at first, and they knew the students had access to the site at the school, they began trying to trace back the usernames that were messaging, so I had to go back in and unblock those names as well. To my surprise, they were eventually able to find out who had created those and who was messaging me. It was our English teacher. This sick freak was messaging those explicit things to me, and after checking his computer, they found out I wasn't the only one. He was definitely arrested and is in prison now. The website is gone too. It only got worse from there, and it ended up being shut down, thankfully. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Feeling like you have to look over your shoulder everywhere you go is just an awful way to live. And parents, no matter how much they may hate you for it, monitor what your kids do online. You have no idea some of the things that can and do happen right under your nose. Back when I was younger, I used to be kind of stupid, specifically when it came to talking to people online. This happened back when I was around 14. I'm 28 now, so that would have been back in 2008. I had some issues with myself at the time. I was overweight and struggling with it. I didn't really have many friends, and I don't really feel like my parents cared about me back then, being the youngest of 4. I know that may sound like a pity story, but it's where my mind was at the time. And at that time, my parents had a desktop computer that they let me use, and they didn't do much to watch or limit what I did, so it kind of used to fill that void in my life. There was a certain website that I used to visit that had an entire section for local chat rooms, and it was typically full of people that were younger, or at least claimed to be younger. I loved chatting in the local rooms because the people there were really nice, and it was almost as if I had a group of friends that lived near me, even though they were only as local as the same state. The site had a whole bio system where you could put in information about yourself, and I had put that I was 18 and that my name was Cheryl, which it is. For the most part, everyone was pretty chill when we spoke, and a few of them were really friendly with me as we spoke about what we liked to do. One day, I went into the chat rooms and did my normal chat introductions as I always did, and I immediately got a direct message request from a guy that had the username Mike D. It was a bit odd, but at the same time, I figured it wouldn't do any harm to message him back. I said hi, and he immediately went into the conversation talking about how he was looking to chat with girls his age because he was feeling lonely. Obviously, this was fine by me. I didn't have luck with guys, and it felt nice to be singled out like this, so we chatted for a while about things he liked to do, his hobbies, and who he was, and then he started asking me about who I was. I wasn't really sure what to say at first, but I did tell him about some of my hobbies, and at one point, I slipped up and mentioned that I was still in school. He asked if I was in college, and that was when it occurred to me that my account said I was 18. For some dumb reason, I asked him if it was okay with him if I was actually younger than I said I was, and he asked how young I was. I told him I was 14, and he said that was fine because he was actually 16. I was relieved because I didn't know how he would take it, and for him to be 2 years older than me, it was nice to have a friend that I could talk to. He and I ended up talking for a while about everything, and over a couple weeks, we became pretty close friends. I felt like I was telling him a lot about myself over that time we spoke, and I even mentioned that I wanted to know more about him. He told me that he was pretty boring and that he wanted to know as much about me as possible, and then said that he wanted to confess that he had a crush on me. I was obviously over the moon. This was a boy that liked me for me. After we talked through that for a little bit, he asked me if I wanted to meet up with him at some point so that we could make things official. I agreed, and we ended up saying that we would meet up at the mall that weekend. We agreed to meet at the food court outside a specific restaurant. Obviously, I was super excited, and I asked my mom if I could go to the mall on that day. She wasn't okay with me going alone, so I had to go with my older sister, who was 16 at the time, and one of her friends. I was totally okay with this because I was going to meet this guy that liked me for me, and I was so happy. On the day of, when we got to the mall, I actually told my sister that I was supposed to meet a boy there, and she was excited for me. We got to the food court at the time that was promised, and, well, let's just say that I was nothing shy of disgusted and disappointed. At the table that we agreed to was a man, but it was not a 16-year-old boy. It was a much older, much more overweight man that was very clearly looking around for someone. When I saw the man, I knew what had happened. This creep was pretending to be a teenage boy to pick up teenage girls and do God knows what with them. I managed to tell my sister that I thought that the creep at the table was the person that asked to meet me, and she kind of laughed at me. She asked me his name and said that she would find out. She went over to the table and audibly asked if his name was Mike. He excitedly looked at her and asked if she was Cheryl, but she said no, but then said that he was a creep and that he shouldn't be trying to meet up with young girls on the internet, and that the girl he was trying to get alone at the mall was a minor. She said this incredibly loud, basically shouting it at him, which my guess was that this was to expose him and make sure he didn't try anything. After shouting at him like that, he stood up and started walking away as quickly as he could, the whole time my sister called him a perv and a creep. After that was all over, she walked back over to me and basically gave me a lecture about how I shouldn't speak to people on the internet because that was what was going to happen. Obviously, I was incredibly upset with the whole thing, but thankful that she was with me, as she was most likely the reason that nothing bad happened. Her being willing to make a scene like that was enough to scare him off. But my mind always wanders to the possibilities. What was he planning to do if we had met alone? What was his long-term goal with all of this? My guess was he was considering kidnapping me when we met, which scares the hell out of me. Of course, my sister told me that we needed to talk to my parents about all of this when we got home, and they weren't exactly happy with me. I was banned from using the computer after that for a couple years, which was probably for the best. It was a lesson learned. Don't trust random people on the internet. Use your best judgment when it comes to things like this. And if you're an adult, meeting with another adult, never go alone. Back when I was young, I used to live in a small suburb outside of a decent-sized town that was pretty quiet. For the most part, I don't recall anything about it being creepy or my parents ever telling me to avoid any people that live there or anything like that. They taught me all about stranger danger and such, but very rarely did I ever feel uncomfortable about people that were around. The event that this story is about was probably the only time anything ever happened that made me scared of people, and that's probably why it's so burned into my brain. At the time this happened, I was around 10 years old. The walk from my house to the school took me somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes every morning, but it was a fairly straight shot. I would take my road to the end, go left, and then take the road the rest of the way to the actual school. Like I mentioned, the suburb was incredibly quiet, so my parents never really had a problem with me walking, and along the way I would typically run into a friend or two, and we would just walk the rest of the way. On this particular morning, for whatever reason, there didn't seem to be anyone else on my morning route, which was unfortunate, but not something that was incredibly unusual. I was about 10 minutes into my walk when I noticed a truck had been pulling up behind me slowly. At first, I thought it might have been our neighbor because it was the same kind of truck, so I turned to wave hello and be polite, but when I looked, it wasn't him. I had no earthly idea who the guy was. As soon as I realized it wasn't my neighbor, I took a slight step back, but then the guy leaned over to the passenger side and started talking to me. I remember he asked me if I had seen a dog running around the street. I responded and told him that I hadn't, and he asked me if I was sure and was really pushy and adamant that the dog was around. I once again told him that I hadn't seen a dog on my walk at all. He then reached his hand over and pushed the door open and smiled while asking me if I would help him find his dog. I told him that I had to go to school and that I was sorry. I wasn't really sorry. There were definitely alarm bells going off in my head at this point, even being 10. I then said that I had to go and told him good luck on finding his dog. As soon as I said this and turned to keep walking, the man pulled up more to match my pace and looked over at me with a much angrier look, then said, "I need your help finding him, please. He's my best friend and I really need to find him. I really think you could help me find him. Now please, Michael, get in the truck. I'll take you to school afterwards." At this point, I was really confused because I had no idea who this guy was and he somehow knew my name. It could have been a guess, sure, but it was a lucky guess if so. Part of me actually thought about getting in the car because he knew my name, but thankfully, I thought about it for a second, and I think my instincts were telling me the truth about the situation. Basically, my brain was saying, do not get in that truck. I just told him again that I needed to get to school and that I hoped he found his dog. And as soon as I said that, I started running toward the school. I heard him yell something aggressive toward me, but I just kept going. After a few moments, I got to school. When I got in, I was pretty clearly out of breath, having run most of the way, and one of the teachers asked me if I was okay. I ended up telling her about the guy in the truck, but she basically told me that I probably misunderstood the situation and that it wasn't a big deal. After that, I kind of forgot about it, mostly because I was a kid and had to deal with class, so it wasn't on my mind for most of the day. When school got out and I went to walk home, I noticed that that truck from that morning was parked in the lot out front. As soon as I saw it, I immediately went back into the school and asked the office if I could call my parents because I needed to ask them to come get me. At first, she didn't seem to want to let me, but then I started talking about feeling sick. I told her that I thought I was going to throw up, and she pretty quickly changed her tune. I ended up calling my mom and asked if she could come pick me up. She ended up coming to get me, and on the way home, she asked if I was okay because it was unlike me. I ended up explaining the whole situation to her. I told her about what happened that morning with the truck, that the man kept telling me he needed my help, and that he knew my name. I will always remember the look on my mom's face when I told her about this. She mentioned that I did the right thing by not trusting the man, and she told me that no adult would ever ask a child for help. They would ask another adult, and that the man probably had bad intentions. She also told me that she was a bit upset that I didn't call her when I got to the school to tell her, and I mentioned that I had told the lady at the school, but she told me that I had just misunderstood the situation. After this all happened, I wasn't allowed to walk to school anymore, and my mom worked with a few other parents in our neighborhood to create a group of kids that walked together every day. She also went in and spoke with the principal and told him about the whole thing, and they took things like this a lot more serious. Not that there were many more events that were reported, but anytime something was reported, letters were sent home with the description of the person, vehicle, and any other pertinent information. Honestly, I know that there wasn't much that happened in the story, but I'm glad that it actually got the process for the school to change, and I was pretty proud when my mom told me that I did the right thing. I don't recall ever seeing that truck again, nor that man, and I kept an eye out for it every morning that we all walked to school. It might not be scary to other people, but to me, like I said, it was terrifying, and I think a good lesson to take from this, for everyone out there, make sure your kids know what is and isn't normal for an adult to do when speaking to them, and to always be on alert when they're out in public, especially alone. This story takes place several years ago in the early to mid 2000s. I think it was 2006 because at the time I was living with my aunt and uncle in the middle of pretty much nowhere Midwest. I won't get into the whole why I was living with them thing because it's not really relevant. Just know I had crappy parents and they were the next best thing, but they really did live in what was pretty much the middle of nowhere. The town, if you could call it that we lived in, had a really small population and pretty much everyone knew everyone else. It was basically one of those small towns where if you pulled into someone's driveway, you'd get met with the business end of a double barrel. On top of this, they lived on what was basically a long dirt road that literally just ended. There were no turnarounds or side roads. It was literally just one long dirt path with gravel on it that went the length of a few properties and then stopped at a tree line. It didn't even have one of those metal guardrails to stop you at the end. It was just forest in a small ravine, pretty much. This meant that the people that came down the road were typically just the people that lived there or were visiting someone that lived there. Very rarely did we get someone that would drive all the way down the road, find that it just ended, and then turn around to go somewhere else. Now that you have an idea of what it was like, I'll get on to what actually happened. I was 16 at the time and had recently gotten my driver's license. So I was the one that drove to the only gas station to get snacks or would drive out to the grocery store to pick up a few things we needed. I was pretty much just taking every single opportunity that I could to get in the car and go, since now I legally could. This was especially true since it was summer break, because otherwise I would just be sitting in the house with my little brother, and that was not something I wanted to do. It was pretty early in the morning, sometime around 8 or so, because my uncle had just gotten up and was complaining that we were out of both creamer and milk for his coffee, and he was getting grumpy because of it. I told him that I would go ahead and run to the store to get what he needed if he wanted. He said I could go, but then told me to take Jimmy, my little brother. I really didn't want to, but I wasn't going to fight him on it. We got in the car, headed out down the drive and onto the road toward the main roads. A few minutes into the drive, I saw what looked like a car sitting on the side of the road with the hood up, which is also something you don't normally see around here. I slowed down as we approached it and saw a man in a button-down shirt and nice pants just kind of standing there in front of the car, looking at it like he was annoyed or frustrated. I asked him if he was okay, and he laughed, then walked over to my window. Here's how the conversation went. Him: No, I'm not okay. I was driving down the road and this thing just stopped running. I don't know what's wrong with it. You wouldn't happen to have a phone I could use, would you? Me. No, I don't. Sorry. Were you going to see someone down this way? I could point you to their house and they could help you. Mind you, this was 2006. Most people didn't have cell phones on them at the time, much less out here. Him. That's all right. Could you give me a ride up the road to the gas station so I could call someone? It's just me out here and I don't really know where I am. This was a bit of a weird statement. He definitely looked out of place, but to be on this road usually meant you knew where you were going. Me. This is my uncle's car and I don't think he'd want me to have a stranger in it. What I can do though, let me turn around and go get him and let him know where you are so he can come out this way. He actually owns a mechanic shop, so he can either tell you what's wrong with it or get you towed out to the shop, and I'm sure he'll be able to fix it. When I said this, he kind of looked upset or disappointed, which was weird to me because I was basically offering to get him a certified mechanic to look at his car for free since he was stuck here. My uncle had been working on cars for something like 30 years at this point, and there was nothing he couldn't diagnose or fix at the shop. The guy kind of just looked around and shook his head and then leaned in and said, "Could you guys just go ahead and give me a ride? I think that would be the better way to do this." That's when my brother leaned forward and started talking. He asked, "Is that guy with you too?" and pointed towards the trees by the car. The guy looked shocked and then turned around to look at the trees, then asked in a sheepish way, "Oh, what guy?" My brother once again pointed and said, "That guy right there, behind the tree. He's been standing there for a while. Does he need a ride too?" Now, my brother can be a bit annoying at times with how he was, but this was practically the thing that saved us in this situation. As soon as the guy realized that we knew the other guy was there, he didn't really seem to know what to say. After a couple seconds of mumbling and jumping around with his words, he seemed to motion to the other guy, and as soon as I saw him start walking out of the trees with a gun in his hands, I booked it. I knew exactly what was going on here, and I knew that I needed to get as far away from this as quickly as I could. I slammed the gas pedal and took off. I'm pretty sure I actually ran over the first guy's foot on the way. After what felt like forever of driving down the road at top speed, I looked back, slowed down, and turned out onto the main road where everything was. When I finally parked in the parking lot of the grocery store, I just kind of sat there with my heart racing and panicking inside. My brother, on the other hand, was just like, "Huh, that was weird." When I was certain I wasn't going to die from a heart attack, we got out and quickly ran into the store. I went over to the desk and asked to use their phone to call my uncle. I told him that some guys were parked on our street and one of them had a gun and that they tried to carjack us. I honestly think they were more likely trying to kidnap us and take the car too, but I just stuck with the carjacking. He told me to stay there until he got up to the store and that he was going to call the cops. When the officer got to the store, my brother and I told him about the whole thing. We told him about the car, the guy, and the other guy with a gun. They did a sweep of the area, but they never found any of them. My uncle said that he didn't see them either when he drove down the road. My guess is that they took off when we did because they knew the cops would be there soon. It was bizarre for them to do this in the middle of a rural area on a road where it's just a bunch of country folk, but at the same time, I guess if you have the patience, you could get a mark pretty easily since people out that way are always willing to stop and help. It was the only time there were any reports of anything like this, and I never saw those two guys again, which tells me they weren't from around there. Honestly, I hope I never do see them again. Hello, friends. And that was a collection of true scary stories. And just a fun fact to go with that. Humans have a primal gaze detecting system that can sense when someone is looking at you, even if not directly. That was kind of interesting since we had a couple creepy stalker people in that. Usually it's just my cat though looking behind me wanting whatever I'm eating. So hopefully that's all that ever happens to you guys is just your cat or dog. Do you have a cat or dog? Feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you liked what you heard, feel free to hit that thumbs up button below. And if you want to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. With that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week and take care.